to another episode of Cyclone InCYders here on ISU TV, Mediacom Channel 18. My name is Matt Van Winkle, joined once again by Dean Burhow-Gall and Alex Halstead of the Iowa State Daily, along with Kody Peterson there on the far end. Guys, we got a lot to talk about today. It's going to be a show dedicated to the Iowa State men's basketball team with last night's loss to Kansas, previewing the Oklahoma game there in the second segment. But guys, Iowa State is the talk of men's basketball nation right now. Lost to Kansas yesterday in overtime. Second loss to them this season in overtime. Two really heartbreaking losses. Games where they were clinging on to that lead, lose it late in the game. Obviously down in Kansas earlier this year. Ben McLemore hits that banked-in three. And then obviously yesterday Elijah Johnson just goes off. He's struggling, coming into this game. Goes out and scores 39 points. Mm-hmm. Initial thoughts on what happened last night at Hilton?
We were talking about it off air, before here. I think Elijah Johnson, I've never seen anything like that. I mean, don't get me wrong, McLemore was good. He was really good at Kansas, 10 to 12, and he had like 33 points. But
yep.
I've never seen a man score 30 points in the second half, so in 25 minutes.
Self himself said that was one of the best performances he's seen in a while, right?
He called him the best guard in the country, best player in the country.
That
night.
Of course.
The
Not
way
many
that
games
he played.
But
But I mean, he's right. The way he played,
maybe all month, maybe in the Big 12 all season.
Yeah, I mean, the guy, his last 4 minutes in the second half, along with overtime, I think he only hit one shot in overtime. But I mean, I've never seen anything like that. He was unstoppable. The fact remains, though, Iowa State needs to play well defensively, and that's where they've struggled. That's
where it came down to. Obviously, a high-scoring game, guys. I mean, you got 81 points scored in the first half alone by the two teams combined. Kansas goes into half with that late basket. Iowa State gives up, an easy one going into half. That's kind of been the story for them in the last few games, giving up easy baskets. But they were riding a two-game winning streak coming into that game. Obviously, 22 games in a row at home they had won. That snapped last night, Alex. What went wrong for Iowa State down the stretch?
Well, I think the interesting thing, obviously the officiating thing at the end, we'll probably get to that in a bit, but Iowa State was up 5 points with 40 seconds to play, basically one full possession, one shot clock.
Yeah.
You can't let that type of lead slip away, and that's what's happened to them far too much this season. Mostly it's been on the road, but when we talked about road woes, I don't know if it's necessarily road woes as much as it is end-of-game woes, because even those games they've lost on the road, they played well in them.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing last night. It was just not closing out a game, especially with 5 points and 40 seconds left.
Yeah, Chris Babb obviously doing a great job shutting down Ben McLemore, who really, was a really big threat against Iowa State down there in Lawrence. He was held to 7 points. Only 7 points in this game. Obviously, Elijah Johnson, the difference maker, Kody, in this game. I mean, it's hard to. You go out and you put 96 points up against Kansas in overtime. You think that's good enough? 17 three-pointers in this game, a school record. You figure that's going to be enough, but when you got Elijah Johnson going out there and just making unbelievable buckets, it's hard to stop a team like that.
Well, that's what the top 10 teams, the big programs have over maybe in Iowa State, is they have multiple McDonald's All-Americans on their teams where one guy's not coming through like McLemore. They've got other guys like a senior like Relaford, or as we saw, Elijah Johnson stepping up for them.
11 ties, 18 lead changes in this game. This was such a high-paced game, just going back and forth. Hilton was electric, as we expected, sold-out crowd in this game. This was everything we expected it to be, and Iowa State just could not find a way, as we've seen all season long. They've had so many games go down to the wire. It just seemed like, you could almost come to expect this team to blow a lead late in the game, and it's sad that's what it's come to, but, that's what happened last night.
Yeah, defensively, I think it hasn't been addressed enough, to be honest. You think about it. Think about this, how they stack up defensively. You have Chris Babb. He's one of the best perimeter defenders, probably one of the best overall defenders in the Big 12, if not the nation. You have Melvin Ejim, who provides that toughness down low. But aside from that, think about Corey Lucius. He's a point guard that was too small to guard Marcus Smart, too small to guard Elijah Johnson. Think about Georges Niang in the post. He's too small, not quick enough. And then think about Clyburn, not quick enough. McGee lost Johnson in the second half many times. That led to those open three-pointers. So they rely on team defense. I would have, I almost expected them to go a little more 2-3 when Ejim came out of the game. They just, defensively, that's what it's come down to at the end of games. What they've missed is they don't have killers, and other teams have those killers they can go to at the end of the game. Marcus Smart for Oklahoma State. You think about McLemore at the end of Fog Island, and Elijah Johnson in this game.
That's a good point. Iowa State's up 5, as we mentioned. Corey Lucius gets to the free throw line to shoot a couple free throws to put Iowa State up by a bigger margin. Misses one of the free throws, which, look back at it now, that could have been the difference maker. That could have gave Iowa State the win. Let's bring up the foul calls you mentioned, Alex. I mean, that was a big play. I mean, there's a no call on Elijah Johnson on George Niang. Gets hit. Looked like his feet were set at the time, but I mean, nothing was called. There was a scrum at the end of that play. Gets called for the foul there, and Elijah Johnson gets to the free throw line, ties the game up with 2 very big free throws. I mean, those are some clutch free throws. You're talking about a difference maker on a team. Elijah Johnson's 39 points. Those 2 free throws were huge. I mean, that's what Iowa State's missing. I think you're right. It's that difference maker, the guy that you can look to make you that shot. And we talked about this all season long. They don't have that guy. I mean, even when they go to overtime, you worried a little bit about this team playing Kansas, how good they are in overtime. Nobody for Iowa State could make that big shot. I mean, they did pull it within 5 points. I mean, Kansas got up about 10 points, was it? And Iowa State cut it down to, I think, was it 4?
There was like 96-100.
Yeah, and then Elijah Johnson goes out and hits another 3, and just silences the crowd.
You know, sitting on the other end of the court, you're sitting behind the play, and you see it, and you don't exactly understand how far out he was. I was thinking to myself, okay, maybe 2-3 feet. And
well,
then
the thing was there was an air ball, and then they didn't realize that there was about 4 seconds left on the clock. I think it was Tharp who kicked it out to Johnson and just hits a turnaround 3-pointer, just kind of chucks it up, switches it. I mean, that's when you knew that it was just Kansas being Kansas.
Well, because Iowa State had fallen behind in overtime, 100-92, and that's when it started to look like it was over. But Clyburn gets fouled, 2 free throws, a 5-second violation, 2 free throws, and all of a sudden it's a 4-point game. They're almost to that stop, 1 second left on the shot clock. And when he passed out to Johnson, because it should have been shot before Johnson got it, they get it to the hottest shooter, makes a shot 2 yards beyond, and that's when you kind of knew it was over. I think that's when the fans kind of started to depart.
Yeah, I was looking back on that foul call, that no call made by the officials. In your opinion, what do you think? Was it a good call? Should there have been a charge called? And that was a difference maker. I mean, you look back, there were a lot of plays that could have been, that could have changed the outcome of the game, but that was a huge play.
The bottom line is that the play was a charge, okay? But there's so much that led up to that. You think about the same thing happened at Fog Allen. Corey Lucius misses the front end of his 2 free throws, which would have made it a 3-point game. Well, if he makes that free throw, they're going to have to shoot a 3-pointer in 11 seconds. And he misses the front end. That whole sequence happens. I mean, it's the biggest gut punch I think I've ever witnessed. And I've never seen national writers speak out the way they did. I've never seen an Iowa State game.
Well, that's what I'm saying. They're the talk of the nation right now
Fran
because
Fraschilla
of this. For this reason,
Fran Fraschilla on TV. It led part of the interruption today. You had Pat Forty speak out against it. I've never seen anything like that. I mean, obviously you've seen your fair share of calls. But
obviously it was the premier game of the night. Iowa State, they got the history with Kansas. I mean, everyone knew this was the big game in town, the big game in the country. And I mean, let's go to this video actually quickly. We've got some post-game coverage from Fred Hoiberg, Bill Self, and some players talking about what kind of happened at the end of this game and what went right for Kansas down the stretch in this game. So let's go to those interviews after last night's loss for Iowa State.
I guarantee it. I don't know if we've had 2 teams in the same game execute offensively as good as what both teams did tonight. That was 2 good teams playing, and the crowd was unbelievable, great, and our guys responded well to the atmosphere. That was as much fun as I think I've had all year long coaching in a game.
You can't fault our effort. Our guys went out there and fought hard for 45 minutes. Played this team 2 times to overtime, top 5 team in the country, and it's unfortunate that we walk away with 0 wins against them.
I don't know if we defended them as bad as they made some hard shots. Tyus McGee, wow, what a game he had, and they tried to play through Yang at the 5 spot, and he made 3 threes. And of course, he and Ejim can make shots. There's no question. But they've combined for 26 in the league, so it's not. So they're combined and making 2 a game, and they played through those guys. And of course, Babb and Lucius and those guys are so good beyond the arc. And Clyburn made shots. It was unbelievable that we were even in the game with them shooting the ball that well. But on the flip side, we shot it pretty good too.
Yeah, I mean, we're playing with a tremendous amount of confidence in the offensive end. As much as any team I've ever been around. We share the ball. We space the floor. We trust each other on that end of the court. We just got to carry that over and find a way to grind out those stops when they matter most. And we got a couple stops, and then you got to get the rebound. They didn't miss many tonight, but the ones they did, they got 14 offensive rebounds. So you got to find a way to get the stop, get the board, and that's when we're at our best when we get out in transition.
And we felt like we had the game won. I don't know. It's just we couldn't get stops at the end of the game and let them come back, get a couple buckets in transition, and that's the reason we lost.
You know, not many teams can say they walk out of a game with Kansas scoring 96. You know, we scored 89 and 96 against them now. You know, we just haven't gotten enough stops. And, you know, look, that's a very difficult team to match up against, especially our team. You know, they're longer than us at every position. And, you know, our guys battle. You know, they battle. It's saying it all year. You know, hopefully we have a lot of season left. You know, we got to bounce back here with these last three, and then hopefully beyond that. But, you know, I love our guys. You know, they're going to continue to fight back, and you know, I'm very confident in them.
I thought we had a good chance to win it, especially at the end. But a call is a call, and we're men here. We're going to move on, and I promise you one thing, we're going to come back even harder the next day.
And there's George Niang and some of the coaches talking about what happened in that last play there at the end. I mean, George Niang says it is what it is. You got to move on, and Fred Hoiberg thinks that his players have, you know, they've been able to come back off these tough losses. And I mean, as we were talking about in the break, Fran Fraschilla talked to Fred Hoiberg and said he didn't get any sleep last night. But the Big 12 released a statement. They went back and reviewed the end of that final minute of regulation. Released a statement earlier today saying the Big 12 conference acknowledges that officiating errors were made at the end of regulation during last night's Kansas at Iowa State men's basketball game. The plays have been reviewed, and appropriate measures will be taken by the coordinator of men's basketball officials to adjust the number of future assignments for those two officials in conjunction with conference policies. So, I mean, does that help a player or coaches sleep at night any better, knowing that they know that they acknowledge that these officials made those mistakes at the end? Obviously, you don't get the win. They're not going to take back Kansas's win for that. But do you feel a little bit better after you hear that if you're a player or a coach?
I think if you're a player, you know, you don't feel much better at all because it's not going to change anything. The only thing that's going to change is you might see those officials not referee a game between Kansas and Iowa State or a Big 12 tournament game.
Yeah.
But besides that, I mean, it doesn't really change anything. That's kind of the bottom line.
Yeah, I think the only thing it does is it acknowledges what most of the nation, I think, agreed upon. Not just Iowa State fans, because we talked about national media was openly tweeting about it. It wasn't just an Iowa State fan thing. It was common knowledge that it probably wasn't the right calls.
Yeah.
So I think all it does is solidify that, but it doesn't help them. I mean, they're still at 9 wins, and they're still fighting to get into the NCAA tournament.
I mean, we were talking about this a little bit too. Does taking Kansas to overtime twice, does that boost your resume at all? I mean, it's not a win, but I mean, you look back at this, and they did acknowledge that this was a mistake at the end of the game, and Iowa State should have won this game. I mean, they didn't go out and say that, but I mean, that's basically what it's saying.
It's easy to say now, but it's because it's still fresh in our minds.
Yeah.
You know, give this a week or two, and we're probably not going to hear much about this unless it comes down to, you know, whether it's Iowa State in the tournament or this one other team. Maybe it sticks in the back of the selection committee's mind, but I think once time passes, that this will probably fade from memory and not be as strong.
Yeah.
That's a good point, too, is if Iowa State makes a tournament, two losses to Kansas and Oklahoma State will maybe fade from memory.
Yeah.
They would have been games that would have pushed them up to a better seed.
Well, yeah.
If they make the tournament, they can maybe forget about it more. But if they miss the tournament, they're going to be looking back at so many games.
If they lose in the first round of the tournament, you look back at those losses, and that would have got you in the that would have been a walk to get you in the tournament. 2 wins against Kansas, win at Okie State. I mean, those are Texas Tech.
Even one of them, maybe two of them.
Even one, yeah. I mean, right now you're sitting with one ranked win, only one good road win out at Baylor. But
I think the difference is, I mean, there's no way unless Iowa State loses out and gets embarrassed at the Big 12 tournament. That's the only way they're not going to make this. Yeah. They're not going to make the NCAA.
Yeah.
Right now, they're, you know, I mean, you got the Billis Index has Iowa State. They're probably one of the 30 best teams, 35 best teams in the country. But I mean, you think about it. It's not like the selection committee doesn't understand context of games. They're not going to look at Iowa State and say, okay, we've got 2 losses to Kansas here. We've got a loss at Oklahoma State. They understand that this game, you know, they understand that the Macklemore 3 sent the game to overtime. They're going to understand that there was a complete mess at the end of Hilton and the Marcus Smart shot.
And the plays like that, the plays like Johnson made, the plays that Macklemore made, that's what separate Iowa State from being an elite team.
Yeah.
If they can somehow find a way to close out these games, I think you can consider them an elite team. I mean, they're making a case to be first in the Big 12.
At least in the conference.
They had a shot. If they would have beat Kansas, they had a legit shot to take the Big 12 title. They have a favorable road schedule, in my opinion. We'll talk about this in the next segment. Oklahoma, a great opportunity to pick another road win. But, I mean, if you pick up that win at Lawrence, if you pick up this win, if you would have picked up that win last night against Kansas, You're sitting almost close to first in the conference with Kansas State.
I think that's one of the toughest things for Iowa State and their fans right now is that I think Iowa State, in general consensus, is that they're an NCAA tournament team, but they're still at 9 wins, fighting for a spot. Even and if they win one here or there, they're in.
They're a bubble team. That's no doubt.
But
Absolutely.
I think they played well enough to, especially with the way college basketball is this year. There's so much. There's not
so much.
I mean, I think Minnesota beat Indiana tonight.
They did.
Yeah.
And so you have all these teams upsetting other teams. Iowa State could probably play with anybody in the country. I think
you're right. If they're shooting well.
If they're shooting well, they can play with anyone in the country, yet here they are still trying to fight their way in after taking 3 top 25 teams late.
It's the biggest storyline season that I think I've ever seen, because you think about it this way. Okay, so they lose to Kansas State on the road. That's a game that's winnable. They haven't not been in a game this year, except maybe UNLV pulled away a little bit from Las Vegas. But you think about it, both Kansas game, Oklahoma State game, they lose at Texas Tech. But if you want to make a case, I mean, obviously there's so much going on this year in college basketball that nearly every team can play with each other. But, you think about it, it's just such a love-hate thing right now. Probably not even a hate thing, more of a heartbreak thing, in my opinion, that they've had to go through this year. Iowa State fans, that is.
The loss to Kansas really, puts a blanket over some great performances from Iowa State last night. I mean, Tyrus McGee goes out, hits 6 3-pointers, 22 points. Corey Lucius, career high, 23 points, hits 10 free throws. Iowa State only committed 8 turnovers in this game.
Yeah.
Kansas is 17. They forced 17 turnovers against Kansas. I mean, if you do that, you think, okay, you see it on paper, okay, Iowa State's probably going to win that game. But then you see what Elijah Johnson does. Kansas goes out, shoots 54% from the field.
And that's what Self said.
Yeah.
I mean, he said it was probably the best offensively executed game on both sides that he's seen this year. And that's true. I mean, again, you mentioned it. 8 turnovers, you wouldn't have guessed that. I mean, they shot 29 of 34 from the free throw line. Yeah. There were people asking me on Twitter last night, well, they're trying to be the non-cynical one, saying, well, the referees weren't the one that decided it.
Yep.
Free throws, turnovers, execution down the stretch. Well, execution down the stretch is won on offensive and defensive ends because they had bad possessions coming down to the end. But when you make 29 of 34 free throws and you turn over less than 10 times against what were they, number 6, a top 6 team, one of the best teams in the country. I mean, you're gonna come out with a win 9 times out of 10.
Like you said, Self said that after the game, where it's not very often that you're gonna hold McLemore under 10.
Yeah.
And
do all Withy to 13.
Make 17 3-pointers. Yeah. He said, you see those stats, you would think Kansas got beat by 30, yet other people stepped up. Johnson, 30 points in the second half, and overtime combined. The other thing is, the 3-pointer is pretty incredible to make 17, and that's his new school record against the number 6 team in the country. But Iowa State's lost 5 of their 6 conference games. They've made 13, 12, 11, 17, and 14 threes. They make that many threes, and they still don't quite close them out.
And how many games have we seen this year around college basketball that's 54 to 46?
So many
Scores like those. I think it was refreshing for the nation to see a game where both offenses were clicking, and I think it.
That's Iowa State's
really
basketball.
It really raised Iowa State's profile as far as being a great shooting team, a great offensive team. And like Alex mentioned with the 3-pointers, we can kind of get used to them making that many 3-pointers a game. They might not win them all, but they're that good of a shooting team. They're going to make double-digit 3-pointers almost every game.
It's just defensively.
Yeah, and Hoiberg said that after the game. If nothing else, the fans got their money's worth. I mean, personally, and I think a lot of fans for basketball, they'd rather see a game like that where there's all that scoring.
Yeah.
That's more NBA style, I think.
Truth.
When Hoiberg said after the game, I think a 30 to 25 game, that has existed this year in college basketball. So
what did Northern Illinois score 2 points and a half?
Well, I mean, Kansas put up how many points against TCU? 50-something?
Right, 12 in the first half, I believe.
And they go out and score 108 against Iowa State in overtime. But
it shows the parity in college basketball.
Really
My goodness, I don't think I've ever seen a season where you have more than probably 10, 15, maybe even 20 teams that actually have a legitimate chance to make a run. I mean, you think about it, there's so much talent everywhere. Oklahoma State came into the year and they struggled so much at the beginning, but now you're seeing Marcus Smart, one of the best players in the country, probably one of the top 3 or 5 in my opinion. But I mean, it's just there's so much parity this year. It's such a great year for college basketball. My goodness.
I mean, absolutely. And why don't we go ahead and pull up the Big 12 standings right now? I just want to look at that right now. Basically because Iowa State with that loss moves down to 5th in the conference. They were tied there with Oklahoma at 9-5, I believe. Now 9-6 in the conference. Kansas is now tied with Kansas State for first in the Big 12. and we look at the big standings. Kansas 24-4, 12-3 in the conference. Look at Kansas State right there, number 13 in the nation, 12-3 in the conference as well. And you look down the line. I mean, Iowa State hypothetically still have a shot to win the Big 12 title, but they got to win out, and Kansas have to lose every game. But I mean, right now you're playing for a 3 or 4 spot in the conference.
I think this is an opinion, but I think the Big 12 will probably get 5 teams in. I think Baylor. If you look at Baylor right now, the 7-7 in the conference.
7-7.
7-7 conference. They still have Kansas and Kansas State.
Yep.
And they're not playing well.
They're not playing that well.
But you think about
They
it.
got Iowa State for sure. I think got to finish above Baylor, and then begin to move up. I mean, I think if you're 4, you're pretty safe.
Yeah.
Because if you're 4, you probably get at least 10 wins.
We talked about it on our earlier show, is that if the Big 12 teams beat each other up enough, they're only going to get 4 or 5 teams in. But at the same time, if you see Baylor beat a Kansas, something like that, you could potentially see 6 games. So I think we could see anywhere from 4 to 6 teams get in. The conference is that talented. I mean, you saw Oklahoma State's ranked 15th in the country. They are unbelievably talented. They could probably play with anybody. They could probably beat anybody. It just shows the amount of parity. And I think there's a lot of talent in the Big 12. It's just, I think it's young talent.
It's young talent,
Think about
right.
McLemore. Think about, Marcus Smart, LeBron Nash. I mean, half of the people don't even know Markel Brown. He's the leading scorer for Oklahoma State.
Well, and that's same with, you hear people in Ames and surrounding areas hear a lot about Niang. Most of the rest of fans in the other part of the conference probably don't know much about him because there's so many other freshmen.
Absolutely. 3 games left in the conference, guys, and a big one coming up on Saturday in Norman against Oklahoma. We'll see if Iowa State can rebound against this big loss to Kansas last night. We're going to talk about that in the next segment coming up here on Cyclone InCYders. And welcome back to Cyclone InCYders. Matt Van Winkle, Dean Burhow-Gall, Alex Halstead, and Kody Peterson here. Guys, we're going to move on to the big game coming up on Saturday. Iowa State's got about 3 or 4 days to recover from that really tough loss, emotional loss, you could say. Yeah. Really a heartbreaking loss to Kansas in overtime on Monday. Got a big one against Oklahoma, a game where they're fighting for positioning in the Big 12. It's on Saturday. Iowa State earlier this month, an 83-64, pretty impressive home win against the Sooners. Only they held OU to 37% from the floor. Pretty good defensive effort in that game. Iowa State shot 51%, 11 3-pointers in that game. So, guys, what are you expecting from this game out of Iowa State? I mean, are they going to be able to overcome that hangover from Kansas?
Well, I think they'll bounce. I won't make a prediction yet, but I think they'll bounce back and play well. The interesting thing is going to be to see how well do they play early on, because not only did they have a tough loss to Kansas, but that game was so hyped up. There's no other game this year that was going to have that much hype going into it. This game won't be as hyped. I mean, it's still obviously meaningful, but getting out to a fast start, we talked about it every show, I think, especially on the road, because you don't want to be so far behind that you have to make it up late in the game.
Absolutely. And OU 9-5 in the conference, Iowa State 9-6 in the conference after that loss yesterday. So I mean, as I said, both these teams are fighting for position. Iowa State coming off losses, 4-1 on the year, so pretty good with that. I mean, you look at a team that's had these tough, heartbreaking losses, so many of them on the road, especially, and what they've been able to do after these losses is pretty impressive.
Well, I think this game, I want you guys to think about this. I think it might carry more weight for the postseason more than the Kansas game. Because you think about it, if they beat Kansas, I mean, certainly their seeding goes up. But I don't think
it's more important now that they lost.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Because now with Oklahoma, they're jockeying for position with Baylor and Oklahoma. And, I mean, Oklahoma's their RPI is so high that I don't think they're going to not make the tournament. But at the same time, I think it carries more weight because if they lose to an Oklahoma team, that's a team that's seen more on their plane and skill level. Yeah. So if they lose, that's more of a boot out of the tournament, towards the bubble that they're probably sitting on right now than a loss at Kansas.
Well, look what Iowa State was able to do against the Sooners at home, hold them to 37% from the field. Coming off a game against Kansas where they didn't play great defensively. I mean, you give up over 100 points in overtime to a good Kansas team, good offensive team. But this is a good Oklahoma team, too. I mean, they can score points. They've got a lot of guys, 3 guys that are averaging double figure scoring this year. I mean, do you expect them to come out with with a good defensive effort against the Sooners, Kody?
I think they will. I think they match up pretty well with Oklahoma.
They do too,
Oklahoma's missing one of their leading freshmen, is it Heald?
Yeah, it's Buddy Hield. Freshman. He fractured his foot just a couple weeks ago. He was averaging 8 points a game for them.
Right, so they have to rely on 2 or 3 guys to get most of their points. And we've seen Iowa State, they can score on anybody. And I think it's going to be tough for Oklahoma to keep up with them.
Fourth in the nation in scoring now, averaging 80.1 points per game at Iowa State. I mean, that's pretty impressive, guys. For a team, I mean, for where they're at right now, they almost have to be that way because, I mean, you know, they don't have big men.
That's right.
They got to get them from. They're shooting the ball extremely well right now. I think the best they've ever shot the ball this season.
The thing is, they're just so top heavy. They're so top heavy on offense that they don't have, you know, especially when Edgem's off the floor and Bab's off the floor, you don't have much defense left. And you saw that when Corey Lucius is getting torched by Elijah Johnson. Don't get me wrong. I think anybody would have been torched by Elijah Johnson with the way that he was shooting the ball. But, I mean, they need to rely on defense. I think the biggest key is going to be that they can't let anybody from Oklahoma get on a run. You think about Scott Pledger, torched him last year. You think about Amath Mbaye, who is, you know, the Big 12 newcomer of the year over Clyburn. He's a really talented player. You think about Romero Osby. They're a talented team. I think it honestly comes down on the defensive end.
Guys, against Kansas, Iowa State was out-rebounded 47-33 in that game. Against OU in early February, they were out-rebounded 40-30, but still were able to win by 19 points. So, I mean, that just shows you when they're shooting the ball well, when they're shooting those three-pointers like they are, you hit 11 three-pointers in the game, you're going to create that little bit of space, and you're going to, you know, make it that much more easier for you to win a game.
Babs seems to have Pledger's number. They've matched up 2 or 3 times now. And I think Oklahoma shot a lot of contested jumpers the first time against Iowa State. A lot of 2-point contested jumpers, kind of questionable shot selection. They're going to have to run a little bit more efficient offense if they want to put up the points they're going to be needed.
The three-pointers make up for other things that they lack at times. Sometimes the defense, sometimes getting out-rebounded. I think, not to go back to Kansas, but I think the three-pointers down the stretch kind of hurt them a little bit because they, I mean, obviously kept them into the game. That's the reason they were in the game and where they were. But in overtime especially, I know they had to use them to try to stick into it. But early on, they relied on the three-pointers. I think, I don't know how many of them were in Yang, but he went like 3 of 17.
He went 3 of 17. He was 2 of 15 before he hit that shot to put it up 5 with 40 seconds left. But the point is, they're not the best two-point basket scoring team. You look at Kansas, 17 of their 25 field goals were three-pointers. So when it comes down to the stretch, you're not relying on a three-pointer. You're relying on somebody to get to the basket. Last year, you have Christopherson, great driver. Obviously, Royce White can go get you a bucket whenever you want. This year, they don't really have a great driver. Corey Lucius can slash in the lane, but he's 5'9". He can't finish over big guys. Clyburn's not quick enough. Bab's a big guy, and he got into the lane a little bit last night, but he's not a guy that gets in there consistently, and that's where they struggle.
Yeah, and the three-pointers, it keeps them in the games, but down the stretch, they need to figure out different ways to maybe pull back on those threes instead of continuing to try them, especially when they have a lead.
Well, I mean, is it fair to say that this is the best the offense has been looking? I mean, all season long. I mean, they're consistently going out there and shooting 50% from the field. I mean, when you're doing that, it's really tough to stop a team. And, I mean, when you look back on Monday night, I mean, Kansas obviously shot the ball well, I mean, in that game too. But Kansas is not the same offense as Oklahoma. Both of them are pretty good. I mean, let's bring up a guy. I mean, we talked about Buddy Hield, the freshman who's injured now, but a guy, Sam Grooms. He's a senior guard for Oklahoma. In the last 3 games, he scored 23 points, 12 points, and 18 points. This is a guy that was only averaging about 18 minutes per game. I look at him kind of similar to like what a Bubu Paulo was. He comes in there early on, was just kind of getting you assists, a few points here and there. But in his last few games, I mean, he was only averaging 4 points coming into these extended minutes once Hield goes out. And this is a guy, I think this is the guy you want to keep an eye on in that game because what he can do, I mean, he can go out there and score. Yeah. He's a guy you're going to want to keep an eye on.
When they came to Ames, he played 15 minutes and had 2 points. I think Hield had 5 points.
Yeah.
If he makes up for that lack in Oklahoma, it's going to be a lot closer than a 20-point game.
And he got to the free throw line a lot in their last game against Baylor. Was 12 for 14 from the line. You know, so I'm not sure exactly how he's getting his points. He must be getting in the lane, so you got to stop penetration and make sure he doesn't get there.
You know the team is not taking this Oklahoma team lightly, but you think about it from a fan's perspective. They probably only see – I mean, it's not like Oklahoma plays on national television all the time, but you think about it, Iowa State fans have probably only seen them, you know, at Hilton, and they say, wow, what is this? What's you know, Iowa State's not going to lose to this team, but you see their RPI, you see the teams they've beaten. They beat Kansas, they've beaten Baylor. I believe they've beaten Oklahoma State.
I think they had a pretty tough non-conference schedule where they hung in some
which is why their RPI is so high.
But obviously Oklahoma is going to be looking for a little bit of revenge now in their home court. Iowa State coming off that road win against Baylor, looking back to last week. I mean, that was the best Iowa State's looked on the road, and that's a game they really needed to win down at Baylor. And do they continue that play on the road? I mean, can they stack 2 together?
Well, again, I think they need to take care of the ball. If you think about it, they were averaging about 15 or 16 turnovers per game on the road as opposed to about 8 or 9 at home. So I think that's obviously a big deal. They only had 8 turnovers against Kansas, which is something that you're really excited to see, especially with Niang, who's not making the shots because he's 3-17, but he had 7 assists and 0 turnovers, as Mr. Hoiberg pointed out to me post-game. But, yeah, I think a big thing is them taking care of the ball. I think they need to shoot it. But, again, defensively, that's the biggest thing. They got to stop Scott Pledger. You have to stop Romero Osby, who's really overlooked. I just think that Iowa State fans who may be listening to this, they need to understand Oklahoma is a really good team. And the Big 12, I mean, there's only probably 5, 6, maybe 7 losses at home this year now with Iowa State's one.
How they play defensively, I think, might be the biggest key because Lucius probably talked for the first 2 minutes about how they understand that they have to get better defensively. Well, now they have the whole week to do that. Are they going to actually do that, or is it just going to be them talking about it?
Yeah.
Because to this point, we've always talked about late game struggle, which is part of and Hoiberg said last night, under 4 minutes last night, they did get some more stops than they have. They just still didn't get enough.
It's just when a guy's out of his mind, it's pretty tough to. I mean, Corey Lucius, that's the most down I think I've ever seen him. And he took what he said was, I accept full responsibility for the way that Elijah Johnson was playing, but maybe he needs to understand that Elijah Johnson was out of his mind last night.
He was hitting some pretty unbelievable
that 3
shots,
2 yards be.
I know, my goodness.
Guys, Iowa State's got 2 road games left. Oklahoma and West Virginia. Got a 1 home game left against Okie State next week. Then it's Big 12 championship time. I mean, running out of road games left. Do you need another one to solidify a spot in the tournament?
I think people understand that the Big 12s. I mean, or that it's hard to win on the road. Like I mentioned, the 80-90% of the home team wins at 80 or 90% of the time. Yeah. But at the same time, Iowa State doesn't have any pushovers left. There's no Texas Tech. There's no TCU. So I think, the point is, I don't think it's the road wins. I think they need to understand they need to get to 9, or they need to get to 10 or 11 Big 12 wins.
Yeah, I think out of the remaining schedule, Oklahoma State, Oklahoma, and West Virginia, they could win all those, and they could lose all those. There's no guarantees in there. And
and then Oklahoma State's ranked right now, so you got another chance to potentially get a ranked win, but 3 games left.
And at home.
Yeah, and it's at home,
I agree with Dean that right now it doesn't matter. Road, home doesn't matter. They got their 1 win on the road to get that monkey off their back. Now it's just get probably 2 to make it a lock before going into the Big 12 tournament. 1, you're probably still looking all right. Maybe needs to solidify it in the Big 12 tournament, but anything right now can help. Just don't lose them all.
I think 2 puts them in. 1, I think if it's against Oklahoma or Oklahoma State, probably puts them in. West Virginia, I'm not saying they're a bad team. They're around 500, I think.
They're
7 in the conference. So that's why we say it's not an easy win.
Well, right. I mean, Iowa State, they could lose out, be stuck at 9 wins, and West Virginia gets 2 or 3. They jump right ahead of Iowa State.
Yeah.
You said it right, Kody. They lose out, they are looking at being one of the first teams out. But and even if they only win against West Virginia and get beat handily by Oklahoma and Oklahoma State, they're looking at they need to prove something in the Big 12 tournament. So the point is, like we referred to earlier, they're jockeying with Oklahoma right now for not only for just position in the conference, but for their resume. So I think that's more important of a game, like I said, than Kansas and Oklahoma State's their chance to really show, okay, there's no question about if Iowa State is or is not a NCAA champion.
And don't forget, Oklahoma's RPI, like we mentioned, is really high. So this is a great opportunity to pick up a good win that will help the resume.
Especially on the road.
Another reason the Oklahoma game is so big, other than jockeying, is if they do tie, Iowa State would win the season tiebreaker, which it doesn't matter as far as it matters for seeding.
Right.
So
if
they would have swept them, they'll have a better seeding in the tournament. Maybe a little easier matchup first round. That could be huge because they might need that.
Because they might.
Well, if you're sitting at 4 or 5, you're going to play the 4, 5, or 6, and you're looking at probably playing a Baylor or a West Virginia really good team, as opposed to maybe a West Virginia team that you've beaten already, or a Texas Tech or TCU.
And playing Baylor a third time would be interesting. When you beat a team twice, it's always interesting.
Especially the way Pierre Jackson is.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see how Iowa State does perform on a neutral court in the Big 12 tournaments. We're obviously going to do a big preview of that coming up in a few weeks, but I think. With their road struggles this year, obviously we've seen them play on neutral courts down in Vegas. Didn't play so well. Obviously, the intensity is turned up at the Big 12 tournament too.
That's gonna be fun.
It is gonna be fun. I think these are all gonna be some pretty good games. We've seen some crazy stuff happen.
Maybe a semifinal rematch with Kansas. That'd be fun.
Can you imagine?
Absolutely.
Oh boy.
Well, yeah. Someone asked Hoiberg that last night, and he's like, "Well,
we're thinking Oklahoma."
3 other games to worry about before that."
Boy.
Absolutely.
Some of the questions that Hoiberg deals with, I tell you what.
Guys, let's talk about one player before we wrap up here. Tyrus McGee, we talked about what he did against Kansas. Let's bring up this graphic here. his numbers of late, guys, have been just unbelievable, off the charts. This guy is really playing well. This season, he's averaging 13.5 points per game. That's off the bench. 3.7 rebounds per game. He's shooting about 46% from three-point range. In the Big 12, he's first in three-point percentages and 3 points made, 10th in scoring in the league. This guy has meant so much to this team. I think if they don't have Tyrus McGee this year, they're not where they are.
That's fair. That's fair. He's been the biggest spark. He's been probably one of the most important players on this team because you think about it, how many times 5 minutes into the game has Hoiberg said, "Whoa, we look flat. Let's get in Tyrus. Let's get him chucking threes."
Well, he didn't come in until about 14 minutes in the first half yesterday.
Yeah, Hoiberg. He didn't.
But I would say was playing well. They were up 14-7, I think,
yes,
when they put him in at that first time out. Yeah,
exactly right. But yeah, you think about it. He's first in three-point percentage and three-pointers made in the Big 12. But there's no question he's top 10 in the country.
I question what Fred Hoiberg's decision to let Corey Lucius shoot that ball when they were tied going. I think they should have given it to McGee.
You got to take on that.
That maybe they could have done a dribble handoff or something like that. They had 4 seconds. Lucius kind of nonchalantly dribbled it up, looking like he was probably going to settle for the three. Well, maybe he could have got to the hole, dished, or handed off to McGee. McGee was the hot hands, and maybe you want to get it to him.
The end of the first half possession, too, where Clyburn dished, I think a lot of people thought Lucius should have had it. So, there's always questioning on those last plays before.
Mad. Corey Lucius was playing fantastic.
Yeah.
He's got a career high in points, but at the same time,
it wasn't the worst move, but maybe they could have got something better.
Maybe.
Right.
Well, and at the same time, you look at what happened on the other end. There's a fair share of makeup type calls.
True.
You see that happen. What if Corey Lucius goes to the line and gets a little bit of body? And you force the official to make a call. You know what I mean? And
he could have picked up his 7th.
At that point in the game, I think you give it to Lucius or McGee, and you're feeling safe about it. Especially the way Lucius was shooting the ball yesterday. He was 23 points. He was very confident. I think he was playing very well in that game. Personally, honestly, I would say I would give it to McGee in that situation, just based on the fact of how clutch he's been. He's hit some big threes. You look at what Kody and I were down. You guys, we were all at Kansas State. We saw him hit some unbelievable three-pointers.
That not only were tough shots, but kept him in the game. They're timely. Early in
One thing I wonder about McGee, what you guys think is the reasoning we always get is that he comes off the bench because he's a spark, which I know that's true because he is a spark, but is part of it his defense?
No.
His defense?
No, he doesn't. Well, the thing is that's why. Well, you think because he doesn't play defense well, that's why he's on the bench? Yes, that's why. You think about it. He lost Elijah Johnson a couple times, and he had huge threes down the stretch, and that's what happened. He goes down to double in on Withy, who's playing with 5 or 6 fouls, and he loses them. They switched a couple times. But I think that's correct.
Cody and I were talking about this before the Kansas game. If Tyrus McGee could play in the league, in the NBA, and our reasoning against him for not being able to is that he's not a great ball handler, turns the ball over a little bit, and if he could run the point. And he was a little bit taller. If he was just a few inches taller, his shot is silky smooth. It's so good right now.
We've been at practice where he's made 15 from the corner in a row.
Yeah.
Funny story. Walk into practice at Sukup. He's got a little bandage on his wrist. I say, all right, Tyrus, I'm gonna tweet it, man. Tyrus is questionable with the sprained wrist, and he goes, nailed it.
Yeah.
Nailed it. And then he shoots it left-handed.
There's practices where he shoots left-handed and hits several.
The point is if he's 6'4", he's in the league. If he has a little bit better handle, he's a guy that maybe you could see as a combo guard. But he's 6'1". That's kind of what's
There have been plenty of short guards in the league. Don't get me wrong,
but
most of them can play defense as well as a Chris Babb could. And if you combine Chris Babb's defense with Tyrus McGee's shot, you got a great idea.
Now we're getting hypotheticals.
All right, guys.
You have White's hands, and then you have Corey Lucius's ball ability, and then you have McGee's shooting, and then you have
first rounder.
We're gonna wrap up here, but I want to get your quick final thoughts on that game last night against Kansas. Just quick thoughts on that game and prediction for Saturday's game as well.
My thought against Kansas is, the biggest gut shot I think I've ever witnessed as a game, at a game. Mm-hmm. I think they understand that they can't hang their heads because Kansas just played so unbelievably, especially Elijah Johnson. Going into Oklahoma, I think this is one of the biggest games, probably one of the biggest games of the year, if not the most important, carrying the most weight at this point.
Every game from here on out is going to be one of the biggest games.
Well, yeah. You think about it.
If they don't get the win somewhere, it's just
going to keep building up.
Thoughts from last night, Alex?
Well, first of all, I agree with him. I don't know if there's a team. I don't see the whole country, but that's been kicked as much as
I was going to say that too. Yeah.
4 times, and they've lost games that shoulda, coulda, woulda. It looked like they were going to win. So that's the main thing. As far as Oklahoma goes, like Dean said, it's obviously a big game, partly because of, like we discussed before, jockeying for position with them,
Yep.
seeding position,
Yeah.
and a road win. I think against a team with that great of an RPI, that would boost Iowa State's RPI.
Seeding wise.
That probably, I think, being a team like Oklahoma on the road begins to get them into the tournament.
Yep.
Last night was a great game. I'm going to just forget about it.
Yeah.
The Oklahoma game, I think it's going to be a lot of what we saw the first time they matched up. I don't think the Oklahoma is a good matchup for Iowa State.
Yeah.
Are we doing predictions here, or are we?
Yeah, I think we will. I want to grab.
We'll start with Kody.
All right, we'll start on this side. All right, I'm going to predict an Iowa State win. I think they'll bounce back.
Okay.
I think it's going to look a lot like it did the first matchup. Maybe not 19 points, but I think they win, 7 to 10 points.
Yeah. Alex, we'll get your quick predictions here for the game.
Okay.
Putting you on the spot.
I don't know what my record is at this point.
Mine's not good, so don't worry about it.
Are you 0-2, Kody? I think you're 0-2.
I'm like 1-3.
Okay. 1-3.
But one's like was out of principle.
Okay.
Well, I think I picked Iowa State against Baylor.
Yeah.
So I'll go with them for another road win.
Okay.
Mainly, and I said it against Baylor because they need it, but Oklahoma needs it. Well,
Yeah.
Maybe not as much.
Yeah,
Iowa State, I think,
do.
they played so well in bounce-back games. They just really need this because I think Oklahoma State's going to be tough, and you don't want to get to the point if you're Iowa State, you don't want to get to the point where you have to beat West Virginia and then win a tournament. It's probably better not to push it off every time.
All right, Iowa State's 3-1 after games in the Big 12 where they've lost. So I'm going to take Iowa State by fewer than 10 points. I think that Oklahoma's going to be a completely different team than what we saw at Hilton. But I think Iowa State's going to shoot well. I think Oklahoma will be better. But like you said, Kody, they're just not that great of a matchup size-wise, quickness-wise, talent-wise with Iowa State.
I think, I think it's going to come down to the wire again. Another Big 12 game coming down to the end. It might be a question if they can close it out.
Yeah. I think it was a 19-point game at Hilton. I think it's going to be closer. I think you're right. Less than 10, maybe a 5-point game. I think it's going to be a great environment. I think the Iowa State's going to be in, Oklahoma's going to want this win very badly. Iowa State's wanting to fight for that 4th spot in the Big 12 right now at 9-6. A win against OU would put them ahead. I mean, I think OU's probably got another game to play this week still. Iowa State's obviously got the week off.
They're at Texas tomorrow.
So that should be another good game.
Wouldn't that be number 10 for Big 12 wins?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
That's kind of the magic
players,
number.
I know players always talk about, well, we're taking it one game at a time.
Yep.
They know that they've got to win a game like this to get to the NCAA tournament.
Yeah.
And maybe they're not thinking that far ahead, but they know what they need.
They do not want to be to the point where they have to go to the Eastern Time Zone, West Virginia, where they've never played, especially a well-coached team like Bob Huggins'
Play a
team.
style they don't want to
And
play.
if that's their 10th win, then they probably still need to do damage in the Big 12 tournament.
I think the quote I take away from Fred Hoiberg from last night's press conference, you guys ran it as the top quote
Did we?
in the Daily. Yeah, I mean, I think he said the guys are going to get over this one and they'll move on.
Hoiberg says, I'm spent, I'm really spent, the guys will bounce back.
The guys will bounce back.
As they always do.
But will Fred Hoiberg bounce back? He didn't say if he would bounce back.
I wonder
He said
how many hours
the
he's
guys-
lost in sleep.
That's the
I
thing.
think
I'm curious.
I think the I'm spent probably went for everybody at Hilton.
Yeah.
Reporters and everybody who had to rewrite
absolutely.
with the.
So they got a few
Even
days
the
till
fans.
Saturday. They got a few days till Saturday to prepare for that game. Kind of regroup, I guess you will, from
They
that
got all
game.
week.
Got all week, absolutely. That game's at 12:45, I
Yeah.
believe, on Saturday down in Norman. We're going to be back next Tuesday, guys. We've got a women's game on Monday. And after that Tuesday show, we're going to bring your buddies back from the women's guys to talk Iowa State women's basketball. After that game, they're done in the Big 12, so we'll know where they sit in the Big 12, where they'll be seated in the Big 12 tournament. So come back next Tuesday, 9 o'clock, same time, same place, right here on ISU TV, Mediacom Channel 18. Thanks for watching Cyclone InCYders. We'll see you next time, guys.